Watson. If you have heard of and listened to Jordan Peterson, what are your thoughts on him and his positions as related to gender roles? Do you feel that he is a critical thinker or biased trying to rationalize his views? Thanks for the question, Jim. Jordan Peterson is a complicated issue. He's a complicated man. There is a lot of controversy around that man, and my position on him is, nuanced, because he's not a black and white. He's not the kind of guy who lends himself to memes or short statements. He talks a lot. I talk a lot, and he impresses me at how much he talks a lot. He's really something. And he doesn't always get right to his point. He's a clinical psychologist, and on the subject of clinical psychology or dealing with, mental issues, mental illnesses, things like that, when he talks about that, he's on solid ground. And I have found his commentary and his talks about, when he talks about that, to be the most interesting thing I think he talks about. He is famous for taking a stand on free speech in Canada and then starting to talk about his political positions. And he refers to cultural Marxism and, the postmodernism. He throws a lot of words around, and these words and their meanings are kind of, convoluted and difficult to understand because different people use them different ways, okay? And so you got to listen to the guy for a long time to kind of get around what is he talking about when he's talking about politics. He's not a simplistic speaker like a Rush Limbaugh or an Alex Jones. He's layered and he's complicated and he's an incredibly intelligent person. That's not to say that he's come to really intelligent conclusions, though. There's lots of things that Jordan Peterson talks about that I don't particularly agree with. I do agree with his position regarding personal responsibility. I agree with his positions regarding the silencing or squelching of free speech by the left, the extreme left, I should say, which I talked about in my podcast this week. And I have been fascinated, absolutely fascinated, by his by what he talks about when he gets into Jungian archetypes and religion. And it's only because of its novelty. It's such an interesting point of view he has about stories and narratives and their place in society and how they shape our beliefs. I will say this, I was intellectually stimulated by what he was saying, okay? It got me thinking, in other words. I don't particularly agree with all the things that he's saying about that, but I found the framing of that model of archetypes and hero narratives, the hero's journey, these various things compared to and contrasted with biblical narratives or religious narratives or stories in general. I found, and how that shapes our thinking, I found that to be very, very interesting. And I think that is more aligned with his psychology degree and his work in that field. And that's why, again, I think he's on more solid ground with that than, say, his politics. I'm not going to get into his politics because I don't totally understand them. He doesn't make himself clear in certain areas. One of the areas he's really, really difficult to pin down is what are his religious views personally. He's not clear on it. I think he said he's Christian, and then one of the other things that he is not really crystal clear about, at least not that I've heard, and I've listened to about 15 to 20 hours of his interviews and podcasts with Joe Rogan, Russell Brand, Sam Harris, interviews he's done with media. So I feel I listened to what he had to say long enough to figure out what he was about, but also to see that there are some things he's not willing to really be open about. And I thought the transgender issue, for example, is something he's not really crystal clear about, at least not in what I saw. But again, I kind of gave up on watching him after a certain point. So I can't really speak to what he talks about in terms of, you asked me about his positions as related to gender roles. I couldn't really speak about or to that very much. I can speak to the psychology stuff. That was the stuff I was most interested in that he had to talk about. The other stuff was interesting, but I really just kind of felt like it was just kind of his opinions about things. I think when it comes to him, I'm rather ambivalent. So, and as I'm sure you can tell from the way I've been answering this question. So that's what I have to say about the guy, and there you go.